Hello and welcome to our Redeemer Lutheran Church Bible study on the book of Psalms. This week, Psalm 52 and 53. I'm Pastor Eric Kleinschmidt from Redeemer Lutheran Church in Highland, Indiana. If you're looking for our worship service that was live streamed this past Sunday, I will put that link directly above so you can find that and watch that at your leisure. Today we have a chest-thumping psalm from David and then also a repetition of a psalm that we have studied earlier with a little bit of change, and we'll talk about why that's there and why that's different. Again, we are using the English Standard Version translation of the scripture, and you are welcome to use whatever you may have at home. Just be aware that sometimes the words are going to be different, obviously, and that the versification might be a little bit different too, but read along and we will catch up, I'm sure. You can always just follow along on the screen too. I'll put that up right there. You notice that we're trying a little bit different lighting once again. Unfortunately, it is a very gloomy and rainy Tuesday afternoon, early evening, and seems that we're always losing light these days, but hopefully this is coming through pretty okay on your screens at home. All right, Psalm 52. Once again, we're told right at the beginning that this is a psalm that was used in worship. And again, it's a strange psalm to use in worship because it's so personal to David's life. And yet, the emotions and the situations that David finds himself in are going to be applicable to a lot of us. And so a lot of us find identification with David through his writing about very personal times. So it's to the choir master. It's a maskil. Again, that's some liturgical term that we don't really understand. We know that it's of David. And then it gives us a specific event that happened in David's life. When Doeg, the Edomite, came and told Saul, David has come to the house of Ahimelech. All right. If you don't know your history of David and Saul, which many of us can't remember all of that history and haven't studied it to that point where we can remember specific events. This was something that is talked about and recorded in 1 Samuel 21 and 22. David is on the run from Saul, and he has some men with him, but not a large army. And he goes to seek refuge in a safe place, and he comes to Ahimelech and says, do you have anything to eat, any supplies, any provisions? And Ahimelech gives him some bread from the temple, from the presence bread, an event that Jesus quotes in the New Testament. And also Ahimelech says, well, I don't have any weapons here except the sword of Goliath, which you slew. And since you killed the man, I suppose you could take it. And so David does. In the happening of those events, David notices that there is a servant of Saul, particularly this Doeg, the Edomite, who's there. And David fears that Doeg is going to tell Saul where David is, and then Saul will come with his army and kill him. Something that does happen. They don't catch David, but Doeg does go and tell Saul. And we're going to read about that so you can kind of get a picture of this event that David is referencing and that Samuel wrote down for us. So let's jump to 1 Samuel 21. David and the holy bread. David came to Nob, nice name for a town, and to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech came to meet David trembling and said to him, "Why are you alone and no one with you?" He realizes that there is something wrong. And David said to Ahimelech the priest, "The king has charged me with the matter and said to me, 'Let no one know anything of the matter about which I send you and with which I have charged you. I have made an appointment with the young men for such and such a place. Now then, what do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever is here." And the priest answered David, "I have no common bread on hand, but there is holy bread, if the young men have kept themselves from women, if they've followed the purity laws for priests in the temple, actually." David answered, yes. So the priest gave him the holy bread, for there was no bread but the bread of the presence, which is removed from before the Lord and replaced by hot bread the day is taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord. His name was Doeg the Edomite, the chief of Saul's herdsmen. And then David asks if there's a spear or sword, because he fears that he's going to be attacked. And that's when they said, we have Goliath. And then David flees to Gath, the city of the Philistines, ironically enough. So a couple things that are going on here. First of all, we see that David comes to a priest, all right, and he lies to him. David does not say, Saul tried to kill me, and God has said that I'm to be king in his place. And so eventually Saul's going to have to be deposed and I'm going to be king. David doesn't say any of that to Ahimelech. Instead, David lies in order to hopefully protect Ahimelech from being a co-conspirator in what was considered by some to be a very treasonous activity. Certainly Saul would paint it that way. So David lies to the priest in order to hopefully save Ahimelech's life. Let's read on. We have to actually go to the next chapter, so 22, 2 Samuel 22. Let's jump there. So David flees, all right? He's in Gath, and then he departs from there, and he goes to this cave, all right? He travels. David departed and went to the forest of Hereth. Okay, now, 1 Samuel 22, verse 6. We're going to find out that Doeg went and told Saul what happened. Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men who were with him. Saul was sitting at Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. And Saul said to his servants who stood about him, Hear now, people of Benjamin. Saul was of the tribe of Benjamin, okay? Will the son of Jesse, okay? That is the tribe of Judah, okay? That has to do with David. So he's talking about David. Will David give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, that all of you have conspired against me? So Saul says, I heard that David was in this place, and none of you told me anything about it. He's of a different tribe. Are you traitorous to my tribe? He's not one of us. You should have told me that he was there. Or are you conspiring against me too? Saul says. Remember, he's sitting up there. He's got a spear in his hand, the king, right? No one discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse, talking about the friendship of David and Jonathan. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as at this day. Strange how Jonathan is brought into this too. Look at here, verse 9. Then answered Doeg the Edomite. There he is, who stood by the servants of Saul. I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. So, when Saul is saying, none of you tell me anything, I heard David was around, and I don't know where he is, and none of you said anything, Doeg goes, well, I saw him, great king, and this is what happened, and this guy gave him provisions, and even prayed to the Lord on his behalf. What does Saul do? The king sent to summon Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and in all his father's house, the priests who were at Nob, and all of them came to the king. So he has Ahimelech, he has his father, well, maybe not his father, but all of his relatives, and also all of the other priests that served with Ahimelech. And Saul said, Hear now, son of Ahitub. And he answered, Here I am, my lord. Ahimelech says, Yeah, why have you summoned me? What do you need? Saul said to him, Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, so that he has risen against me to lie in wait as this day? Then Ahimelech answered the king, And who among all your servants is so faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law, and captain over your bodyguard, and honored in your house? Ahimelech knows nothing about what had happened between David and Saul, and David had lied to him about it. He didn't tell him what went on. So Ahimelech is still thinking that everything's just rosy between David and Saul. And so he says, I didn't know there's a problem. What's the problem? Is today the first time that I've inquired of God for him? Well, of course I prayed to God. I've done this before. I do this all the time for you, Saul. What's the big deal? Let not the king impute anything to his servant or to all the house of my father, for your servant has known nothing of all of this, much or little. He goes, I don't know what's going on, but I'm just doing what you've had me do before. Remember, in his mind, he thought he was helping David for an errand that Saul had sent him on. Okay? So he's being totally honest in what he's saying. And the king said, you shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house, for nothing but telling the truth and operating in what he thought was being a faithful servant to the king. Saul is going to not only kill him, but his entire family. This is rash behavior. And the king said to the guard who stood about him, turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand is also with David. And they knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me. They're all part of this treason. Kill them all. But the servants of the king would not put out their hand to strike the priests of the Lord. The servants were like, wait a minute. This is crossing a line. Not only are these guys probably innocent, but also they serve the Lord, and we're not messing with the Lord. That is a line we will not cross, O king. This is mutiny. And those servants said, no, our allegiance to God is more important than our allegiance to you. Then look what happens. Verse 18. Then the king said to Doeg, you turn and strike the priests. And Doeg responds immediately. He turned and struck down the priests. He killed on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod. He killed 85 priests. And Nob, the city of the priests, he put to the sword, both man and woman, child and infant, ox, donkey, and sheep, he put to the sword. So he kills everybody. Doeg is a bloodthirsty man, and he sought his honor and his wealth in being Saul's bloodthirsty man. Yeah. One of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. And David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me, do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me you shall be in safekeeping. David extends the protection of the Lord to this person that he feels responsible for getting everybody killed because David lied and involved him. So David takes responsibility for it, but also he sees the irrationality of Saul and the bloodthirstiness of Doeg, the Edomite. Okay? Now, I want you to remember that we have this difference of tribal identification. So all you sons of Benjamin, I don't even know where it is. That's up here. Hear now, you people of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give everyone fields and vineyards? He's saying, are you with my tribe or the other one? That'll come into play later, okay? But right now, think about Doeg being a very bloodthirsty guy. All right, so that is the occasion for the writing of this psalm, okay? So David starts off, why do you boast of evil, O mighty man? You can bet that Doeg went around and said, oh, guess what I did? Yep, oh, yep, everybody's in fear of me because I'm such a bad man, right? And David says, why do you boast of evil, O mighty man? You can hear this sarcasm dripping. The steadfast love of God endures all the day. You can hear David thumping his chest. I'm the one who killed Goliath, dude. You slaughtered 85 priests and women and children. Come at me. Come at me, bro. Right? That's what David is saying here. Why do you boast of evil, O mighty man? And then look, David checks his ego very quickly and points to God. And that's going to be the difference and the most important thing that happens here. The steadfast love of God endures all the day. Your tongue plots destruction like a sharp razor, you worker of deceit. You love evil more than good and lying more than speaking what is right. Rest on that. Selah. Think about that for a bit. You love all words that devour, O deceitful tongue. But God will break you down forever. He will snatch and tear you from your tent. He will uproot you from the land of the living. Selah. David is saying, you've made an enemy of God this day. And if you think that you can get away from him, he's going to suck you out of your tent by your toes, and he's going to throw you up in the air, up into the abyss, and you'll never be there. I mean, like paranormal activity, like just tear him from his tent while he thinks he's sleeping in safety. There's no way you're going to escape God. And so your days are numbered. Rest on that. Selah. David is really brash here, and we get to see that part of his personality. And we think of David as a young minstrel, right? But this is a guy who, while he was keeping sheep, fought off bears and lions in hand-to-hand combat, who killed Goliath. So he is a violent man and to be feared, and he knows it. And I'm sure that David, enjoyed that reputation because he's human, and we see that coming out here. Like I said, this is a chest thumper of a psalm for David. Even while he's saying, you've made an enemy of God and God's going to do this. But, yep, I'm not afraid of you because I got God on my side. The righteous shall see and fear and shall laugh at him. So, Doeg, you think you're so great? We're going to laugh at you. Your name is going to be nothing but a joke. See the man who had not made God his refuge, but trusted in the abundance of his riches, sought his refuge in his own destruction. What a cool phrase there. He sought refuge in his own destruction. What an apt description of our sinful condition, that we seek out that what will destroy us. We chase after sinful things, knowing full well that the wages of sin is death. We're all in that boat of Doeg. We're all convicted here, seeking refuge in our own destruction. We think about our will rather than God's will. And we seek after it, and we know it's not right, and still we do it. It's illogical. Sin is not logical, and yet we are trapped in it. And we imagine sometimes that if we just have more sin, more freedom, more whatever, then things will get better. And really it's just leading us further and further down the path of destruction. It's very much an addiction. And so we're all kind of like, ooh, man, I thought Doeg was this really terrible guy, but I'm finding that maybe we have some things in common. Whew. It's a little bit disconcerting, isn't it? Well, thankfully, there's some gospel that's coming. So Doeg is going to be a laughingstock, and he is going after his own destruction. We'll just let him go. But I am like a green olive tree, David says, in the house of God. I trust in the steadfast love of God forever and ever. I thank you forever because you have done it. He's talking to God now. I wait for your name, for it is good, in the presence of the godly. So Saul is over there with his warriors and his slaughterers of children and defenseless priests. The priests weren't defenseless, by the way. The Levites were charged with killing anybody that got too close to the temple of God, so they also were trained in warfare. But in this case, they probably didn't have weapons. They probably just came because the king said, hey, I want to talk to the priests. And they said, okay. And then next thing they know, one guy cuts down 85 of them. Okay? So David is saying that's that option. I'm over here doing the godly and righteous thing, waiting on the Lord to deliver me. David plays that part very, very well. But there's something hidden in here that's really kind of cool, okay? I am like a green olive tree. Remember back in Samuel, when we were talking about that, Saul said to his servants, "Hear now, people of Benjamin," Saul's tribe, "will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards?" All right. If you're a churchgoer and you know your church seasons, Advent is coming up. And one of the things that we talk about in Advent comes from Isaiah chapter 11. We're going to jump there. 11 verse 1. "There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, the Spirit of wisdom and understanding, the Spirit of counsel and might, the Spirit of knowledge and the fear of the Lord." Isaiah 11 is one of the great prophecies of the Messiah coming from the tribe of Judah, which is also the stump of Jesse, okay? That there will be a shoot that comes up almost like a green olive tree, right? So Isaiah 11, David in Psalm 52, both talking about the promise of the Messiah, that the Messiah will come in the house of God, and I will wait for him. I will wait for your name, for it is good in the presence of the godly. David is waiting for Jesus here. And David knows that the Messiah will come from his line, that from this stump of Jesse will come the one who will save all of them. And so I find it interesting in Samuel that when we record the words of Saul, he talks about the tribe of Benjamin and the son of Jesse instead of the tribe of Judah. He makes a specific reference to David being a son of Jesse. Okay? That from David's line will come the Messiah, from the stump of Jesse, a branch, a green olive tree will come. So there we have a messianic prophecy through the line of David right here in Psalm 52, the hope for all of us who find ourselves a little too much like Doeg and Saul at times, and even David in his more prideful and sinful moments, and yet wait for the Savior. Thankful for us, he's already come. So we have that benefit. David waiting for Jesus at the end of Psalm 52. Love it. We're going to take a short break, and I will see you on the other side. Welcome back. Hopefully everything recorded well for you, and you're tracking through Psalm 52. Let's go on to Psalm 53, shall we? Psalm 53 is pretty much a repetition of Psalm 14, one that we've already studied. In fact, it is almost a word-for-word repetition of Psalm 14. Why is that? Well, if you've been in our Sunday morning Bible classes, you've heard me say over and over that repetition is how Hebrew people understand importance. It's how they say this is so important that we need to repeat it, and we want you to commit it to memory. So repetition, repetition, repetition. Multiplication is how they make you understand that what they're saying is really, really important, and they don't want you to forget it. Okay? So to repeat Psalm 14 is to remind the people, especially people that would have been familiar with it in use in worship, and then to change it just enough for a new situation. So that's what I think is happening in Psalm 53, is David is going back to a familiar psalm that the people were familiar with and changing a line in order to make a point. Okay? So, the text. The choir master, again, used in worship, according to Mahalath. Again, we don't know what Mahalath means. The root in Hebrew is really ambiguous. It could mean anything from dance to adornment, especially an adornment around the neck, and also sickness. All of those words are within the root history of the word mahalath. Our best guess is that whatever it was, when we think it's an arrangement of how the music was to be played or how it was to be sung, is that it's not a joyful tune. A sickness dance, a sickness writhing. It's not a pleasant kind of tune. And the content of the psalm kind of plays that out and fits with that. A maskil of David. So again, it's a type of psalm, poem, lyric that David is ascribing. Again, we just don't know what those words really meant to them back then, and it's kind of sad that we don't know. But I suppose it's not all that important in the end, but it would be nice to know since it is here in Scripture. 53 verse 1, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, doing abominable iniquity. There is none who does good. This is probably going to be really, really boring for some of you. If you've never investigated the world of philosophy, you probably have no idea who Friedrich Nietzsche was. But he was a philosopher in Germany, late 1800s. I think he died in 1900 on the dot, who's very important for the way that we think about the world and ethics and a lot of things. It's not that what he said is true, it's that he made the world think about those topics in a very different way. And in that way, he shaped a lot of our ways of thinking in the West and how we think about God and how we think about morality, how we think about truth, and how we think about science. Nietzsche plays a big part in that. If you were in college and you took a course in philosophy, you probably had to read at least some of Friedrich Nietzsche's works, or at least you were told about his most famous line in which he said, God is dead. That's probably what Nietzsche's known most for, that of saying that God is dead. That is one of those things that's often taken out of context, and people don't really know what it means. And a lot of people that I find that quote that, usually against Christians, are saying, well, science has disproven the God. God is just a superstition. We don't need him anymore. We've evolved past the point of God. It is, as Nietzsche said, God is dead. And I say, did you actually read that? Or are you just regurgitating that from some professor that you had in college? Because if you actually go back and read where that comment is made, which I did, Friedrich Nietzsche wrote those lines the first time in The Gay Science. You need to understand that gay back then meant a little bit different than it does today. It had different denotation and connotation in those days, okay? So, but Friedrich Nietzsche, The Gay Science, is where he writes that. And he actually has it as the madman. A madman comes to these lovers of science and says, where is God? And they say, well, is he lost? Strange man looking for God, how foolish. And he says, no, God is dead and God remains dead. We have killed him. What are we going to do now? His argument is that now that if we have moved past God, what do we do? Nietzsche comes down on this basically a survival of the fittest He argues against nihilism, the idea that nothing matters, and yet he pushes everybody towards nihilism. Again, philosophy, and you didn't start watching this because you wanted to discuss philosophy. I know that. I'm just telling you that you'll often hear Nietzsche's comment about God is dead being used against Christians, and that's really not the context of that statement within Nietzsche's writings. His point is that if we don't have God, then morality and ethics are really out the window. And he doesn't paint a very nice picture of a world where that is the case. And that's where you get the Ubermensch, the overman, that, people that transcend, then rule over others, and everybody's just trying to exert their will on the world around them. And it's kind of every man for himself. And it's really kind of a depressing view of humanity and society in the future, one which we may be living in right now, because maybe Friedrich Nietzsche wasn't that far off on what was going to happen when we got rid of God, right? So he's quoted as being this very smart guy who said that God is dead, and that's really not what his point was. And besides, Nietzsche was a nut. I'm sorry. He's important, but he was crazy. At the age of 40, my age, he went nuts, broke his brain, probably because of syphilis, but he had other medical issues too. He was a frequenter of brothels, so, okay. Went crazy, literally lost his mind, had to be taken care of by his mom until she died, and then his poor sister had to take care of him for another 8 years until he died at the age of 50, and wrote crazy things for the last 13, 14, 15 years of his life. So I don't follow the secular world of saying that Nietzsche was so great and important, but he might have been right a few things. But one of the things he was not right about is that God is dead. He's totally wrong. And that's why I like, oops, wrong one. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. Yes, I'm calling Friedrich Nietzsche a fool. It's a good thing we don't have comments enabled below, because I would get a whole bunch of hate mail for that. Man, when we don't have God, we have no basis for morality or ethics. There is no reason to be merciful or kind. What we're left with is basically survival of the fittest. If I can kill you and take your stuff, I should, because that's beneficial for the species. If you can kill me and take my stuff, then you should, because that's beneficial for the species. That's the best we get if we don't have the ethics and the morality that God has written on our hearts and revealed in Holy Scripture. It's just, so there is no God is really a foolish, dumb thing to believe and to say. And yet it's gaining popularity in our world all the time. They are corrupt, doing abominable iniquity. Again, if you have no morality, that makes sense. There is none who does any good. God, who does exist, who's not dead but very much alive, looks down from heaven on the children of man to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. Is there anybody left that still cares? Yeah, we're here. We're here, God. We're trying. They have all fallen away. Together they have been corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. That makes me think of the reading we just had in our worship service this past weekend for Reformation Day observed from Romans 3. Actually, Romans 3:23. Look at here. No one is righteous. Okay? No one is righteous. Not one. No one understands. No one seeks for God. This is a quote here. Paul is quoting Psalms. Not sure if he's drawing from Psalm 14 or Psalm 53 here, but they both basically say the same thing. So when we get down here, there is no distinction. Verse 23. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Okay? That's the conclusion. That we're all in the same boat. And we get that from the Bible. There's none of us who is holy enough for God. That's why there's Jesus. That's why we all need Jesus. That's why Jesus died for the sins of the whole world. He didn't die for the sins of the whole world except for Larry, who's perfect and good, and everybody needs to be like Larry. But since the rest of you losers can't be like Larry, I guess Jesus will have to die for the rest of you, but Larry's free to go. No. Larry also has sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Sorry, Larry, if you're watching this. All of us are in the same boat. All of us need Jesus. God looks down. None of these people are good. Man, they're all falling away. They're all corrupted. Have those who work evil no knowledge? Like, don't they realize what they're doing to themselves? Remember what we had back here in Psalm 52? Sought refuge in his own destruction. It's mirrored right here in Psalm 53. Have those who work evil no knowledge? Don't they know what they're doing to themselves? Don't they see that this momentary pleasure or joy or whatever they get out of this sin is poisoning them, is leading to their death? God's like, how stupid can these people be, right? And they eat up my people. So the ones that are trying to be righteous, the world eats up and spits out. They eat up my people as they eat bread. If you've been in Sunday morning Bible class, this phrase probably also goes big. I remember something like that because it wasn't that long ago when we were talking about Numbers 14. God said, go into the promised land. They said, let's send some spies. They send 12 spies. 10 of them panic in their boots and come back with a bad report saying that these people will eat us up. And only Joshua and Caleb come back to tell the truth. And yet the people rebel. They actually say, let's choose a different leader and go back to Egypt. We'd rather be in slavery than go into this promised land. Moses and Aaron intercede for the people. Let's see, Numbers 14:9. Only do not rebel against the Lord. Do not fear the people in the land, for they are bread for us. That's Joshua and Caleb's language. You think they're going to eat us up? We are going to eat them like soft and mushy bread. That's what we're going to do to those people. It's that easy because God is with us. So back here in Psalm 53, David is recalling that history from Numbers, his own people's history. He's showing his knowledge of the scriptures too, that he knows that language, that phrase, and saying, we are in the minority. Joshua and Caleb were in the minority, standing against their 10 brothers who were lying about what they had seen, and yet they still stood up for the truth. It seems that the evil are eating up God's people who are in the minority, who are standing for the truth. It seems like those who are standing up for what is right are always in the minority these days, laughed at, ridiculed, shouted down, right? That's the way it seems. They do not call upon God. There they are. They're out there, God says, in great terror where there is no terror. There's no reason to be afraid, people. God is on our side. Again, this goes back to the coming into the promised land. God promised this. It's yours. It is your possession. Just go in and receive it. And the people said, no, there's people there that are going to kill us. And what terror? And God's saying, terror? There's no terror. When you get there, you're going to see this because you're going to march your Ark of the Covenant around these walls and they're going to fall down. That's how easy it's going to be for you. So there is no terror. Just go and do and receive and rejoice. And still they don't. God scatters the bones of him who encamps against you. God is already winning this victory. You put them to shame, for God has rejected them. And notice that David is putting all the focus on God. God does all this. He did that in the earlier Psalm, Psalm 52. It wasn't, oh, Doeg, I'm going to challenge you to a fight. David is saying, no, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to let God take care of you, Doeg, because I know what God has promised, that I will be king and everything will be okay. So good luck fighting God. The same thing is happening here. And that's why these Psalms are paired up together. Verse 6. Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion. Salvation out of Zion. Remember, whenever we see Zion, we think Jerusalem, we think temple, God's house, and we also think what happened right outside the gates of Jerusalem on a hill called Calvary. Jesus was crucified. The salvation for Israel, the Savior of God's people, who are all over the world. We're a spiritual Israel, right? Okay. When God restores the fortunes of his people, let Jacob rejoice, let Israel be glad. David is recounting the promise here. Okay, so one of the only differences between this and Psalm 14 is here in verse 5. So let's, I'll open this one up and we'll go to Psalm 14, okay? I didn't get that queued up. Psalm 14. All right. The fool says there is no God. We've heard this, okay? Fool says in his heart there is no God. They are corrupt. They do abominable deeds. There is none who does any good. Yep, we've heard that. Lord looks down from heaven. See if there are any who understand, who seek after God. Same. All have turned aside. They have become corrupt. There is none who does good, not even one. Yep, same. Have they no knowledge, the evildoers, who eat up my people as they eat bread and do not call upon the Lord? Same. There they are in great terror. For God is with the generation of the righteous. You would shame the plans of the poor, but the Lord is his refuge. That's different. Oh, that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion. Okay, that's the same. So 5 and 6 here in 14 are different than verse 5 here. In great terror there is no terror. They are in great terror. God scatters the bones of him who camps against you. You put them to shame. God has rejected them. You would shame the plans of the poor, but the Lord is his refuge. So obviously there are different events that David is writing about. In the first one, it seems like David is being afflicted, or that there's somebody that's oppressing someone else that David paints as being poor. In this case, it definitely seems that David is envisioning an army encamped against his people. And that could be a very literal army, because that happened, okay? There were battles that were fought with different powers, okay? It could also be a metaphorical army, that maybe there was something terrible that was happening in the kingdom. Maybe there were more people telling lies and doing false prophets and things like that. Could be a metaphorical thing, but in both cases, God is the one who is fighting, and God is the one who will win. And that is a theme that we see throughout David's Psalms. And we saw that beautifully in the 2 Psalms for today. That David, as accomplished as he is at warfare, and as bold as he is to thump his chest at Doeg and say, oh yeah, I killed Goliath. I still got his sword. Yeah, I think you could do that. As brash as David could be, he still always says, you know what? What's more important than me is what God wills. And if God wills this and God keeps his promises, then God will fight for me and God will work this out. And so I will wait on the Lord. If you're looking for one of the major themes throughout all the books of the Psalms, through all of them, waiting on the Lord is going to be pretty high up there. You're going to find it over and over and over and over again. And so that's very much the life of those that want to seek after God and follow where Christ has led. And that is waiting on God's will to be done. Which is why when Jesus taught us to pray, when you pray, right, thy will be done. He modeled that in the Garden of Gethsemane. Even though he laid down his life willingly, he still had that very human emotion to knowing that he was about to be arrested and tortured and then killed. And even though he knew it was the entire purpose from before the foundation of the world, in his humanity, he still asks his heavenly Father to take this cup from him. But even so, not my will, but thy will be done. He models that submission and that patience and that trust and that faith for us in a way that I don't think any of us could ever live up to. And that's why he did it, because he did it for us. So throughout the Psalms, as you read, notice how many times that we were talking about patience, about waiting on the Lord. And David was very much a man of action, and yet he still, throughout the Psalms, talks about, I'm going to wait for the Lord to sort this out. So I hope that's encouragement for you today, that no matter what you're going through, coronavirus, dealing with that uncertainty, knowing that God has it all figured out, and that if you are with Jesus and Jesus is with you, then you don't have anything to worry about. Because even if you should die today, he has you. And yes, if you should die today, that would be very, very terrible. We will miss you very, very much. And yet you are not lost, because your Savior did not lose. For salvation has come out of Zion, as David asked. A shoot from the stump of Jesse, the tribe of Judah, has arisen, and so we are as green olive trees in the house of the Lord, where we will grow and prosper and live forevermore. All of that imagery, all of that promise, all of that beauty is contained just in these two Psalms for today. Hope you enjoyed them. I will put the link to last week's Bible study up above. God bless you, and I will see you, God willing, next Wednesday.